socially right now in Crimea and throughout Russia. I think it's fair to say it's a difficult environment in which to speak openly about, sympathetically about the Ukrainian government and its objectives. So again, I'm cognizant of that, but I didn't really have the impression that anybody was, for what it's worth, I didn't have the impression that anybody was saying this to me, was expressing these views out of fear. I had the impression that these people passionately and genuinely felt that this was not in the best interest of their families, their communities, and of the people of Crimea, that it be brought back under the rule of Kiev. At the same time, I didn't really encounter anybody who was hostile to the people of Ukraine. There was tremendous amount of antipathy, shall we say, although it was surprisingly diplomatically expressed a lot of the time towards the government of Ukraine. People did not, obviously, they don't view the government of Ukraine, the people I spoke to, as the legitimate government of Ukraine. They do view it as a coup regime. They do view it as being ultra-nationalist. A lot of people feel it's an outright neo-Nazi regime. They feel that government is acting in ways that are contrary to the interests of ordinary Ukrainians. And, I heard a lot of people express sadness for what's happening to the Ukrainian people. And a sincere wish that government be removed from power and replaced by one that will actually act in their interests. Again, you can disagree or not with what I'm relating to you, but that's what I heard. And the last thing I'll say, sort of summarizing my experience there, there's so much I could say about it, but I think one other highlight of it for me was that I didn't encounter any hostility towards me personally, even though virtually everybody I spoke to had no idea who I was when they met me. They'd never heard of me before. They didn't know what my views were about the Ukraine war. And they knew from the outset that I'm a Canadian. I don't speak Russian. I, speak with an accent from North America. And yet I was expecting hostility. Some, I would be understandable given the, posture our government has taken towards Russia. But I didn't get any of that, which was surprising to me. So I think I came away feeling, there's really no substitute for personal interaction with people. This is the best way to actually understand where they're coming from and to de-escalate conflict, is to personally interact with people. We are taking the wrong approach here. We are trying in the West to literally sever all lines of communication with not just the Russian government, between the Russian government and the Western governments, but between our peoples. This is a terrible mistake. We need to talk to each other, preferably face to face if that's possible.
Yeah, I think you're kind of hitting on something that also just gets completely lost when we talk about this, which is that this idea that, there's always been this hostility and conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which is not really true. I mean, I know history has been really revised on this and rewritten, but I think one thing that's been completely forgotten or not ever talked about is this long history of cooperation and friendship between Russia and Ukraine. Even this idea, even though as we know, there is this issue with these neo-Nazi ultra-nationalists in Ukraine, the idea that Ukraine is just filled with people that believe in this is not true at all, No. There's this long history of Ukrainians who fought in the Red Army correctly and bravely to defeat fascism in World War II. And I think that's been one of the really disgraceful things over the last year, is the way that legacy is being completely erased and forgotten. And all the statues of these Ukrainian Soviet heroes are being torn down, and the legacy is being replaced by these ultra-nationalists like the Banderas who helped carry out the Holocaust. I think it's a real shame. And this whole narrative about Russia was occupying Ukraine and and the real nationalists were struggling against that. It completely obscures the reality of the last century, really, and about the relationship that Ukraine had with Russia and had with the rest of the Soviet Union. It's been completely ignored and forgotten, which I think is really a shame.
Yeah, within 3 hours of my setting foot in Sevastopol, I visited the memorial to the Soviet soldiers who lost their lives in the defense of Sevastopol during, I believe it was an 8-month brutal siege by the Nazi forces, supported and supplemented by forces from Romania. that were fighting alongside the Nazis. I believe it was some 180,000 Soviet soldiers. Obviously, a number of them would have been Ukrainian, were certainly Ukrainian. Many of them were Russians. Others came from other parts of the Soviet Empire, died in the defense of Sebastopol, and it was completely obliterated. Completely obliterated. So when you're living there, a Crimean, and you've emerged out of that historical trauma. And by the way, we all, those of us who know anything about the Second World War, know that this was a pattern that was repeated throughout the Western Soviet Union. Cities were completely obliterated. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people, many of them Ukrainians, a great many of them Russians. For us I mean, it's so deeply insulting for us who owe this tremendous debt of gratitude to the peoples of the Soviet Union for contributing and sacrificing so much in the defeat of Nazism, to, basically just spit on that entire legacy. It's deeply insulting and offensive to the Russian people, and that should be easy for us to understand. We shouldn't have. I mean, we didn't suffer anything along the lines of that kind of a historical trauma in the defeat of Nazism, those of us in the West. How many Canadian cities were obliterated by the Nazis? How many American cities were obliterated by the Nazis? We lost a tiny fraction of the peoples that the Soviet Union lost. And so it's just disgraceful for us to try to erase that. And it really sends a terrible message to the people of Russia about what our intentions are, that we're not even able to acknowledge that sacrifice by their peoples anymore. Not that we ever did a particularly good job of it in the West.
Yeah.
But that's just poisoning the discourse so badly that it makes some kind of a negotiated resolution of this war virtually impossible.
Yeah, and not only have we not honored that sacrifice, but immediately following the war, we engaged in this project of importing these like Ukrainian former SS members into the country specifically. That's why we have now in Canada these like Nazi monuments to these Waffen SS divisions. And I think that's been one thing that's become really, the more I've learned about this over the last couple of years, because I started paying attention to this a couple of years ago, because of the fact that we had these monuments, I started asking kind of some questions about, well, what I thought Canada was against fascism and against the Nazis. Why do we have monuments to SS divisions in Canada? You start looking into that, and you realize that it's not quite as simple as the narrative has been as we've been led to believe about our role in the global geopolitics and our role against fascism. I think it's been really alarming when you realize Canada's role in sort of rehabilitating this ultra right wing sort of Ukrainian nationalism. Specifically, you see Chrystia Freeland, that's part of her whole life's work and her whole family's life's work, is this kind of is promoting this very specific vision of right wing Ukrainian anti-Soviet ultranationalism. And Canada has played a really central role in promoting that narrative and instilling that sort of narrative and making sure that when people think of Ukraine, that's what they understand Ukrainians to be. This ultranationalist anti-Soviet people who are against the Russians. And I think it's been Canada's role in being part of that project now. It's like since the post-war period has really gone under the radar. And now we see them during this conflict still engaging that exact same sort of project.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Chrystia Freeland. One of the people I met with before going to Crimea, I met in Moscow with two officials from the Russian Foreign Ministry. I requested that meeting, by the way, and I requested it through the Russian embassy in Ottawa a couple of weeks before my departure, and the ambassador kindly arranged for me to meet with them. And one of them had been a diplomat in the Russian embassy in Ottawa and played a central role in exposing the fact that Chrystia Freeland's grandfather was a Nazi collaborator, and that she had effectively lied to the Canadian people about him being a champion of democracy, which was how she portrayed him. And the mainstream media at the time, he was expelled. He was expelled by the Canadian government for revealing that truth. And you'd have to believe me, you can find articles at the time. This is obviously well before we got to the stage we're in now in Ukraine, from the mainstream media, including the Toronto Star, where they acknowledged that the reason why the Trudeau government was expelling him was because he revealed the truth about Chrystia Freeland's grandfather. again, like, how are Canadians not deeply troubled by all of this? That somebody like Chrystia Freeland, obviously she's not responsible for her grandfather's atrocious behavior, but somebody who lied about that, and then, who undoubtedly played a role in the expulsion of the Russian diplomat who exposed it, actually did a service to Canadians by revealing the truth about her grandfather, that person has a central role in formulating Canadian government policy towards the war in Ukraine. That should be something very, really disturbing to Canadians. And yet, in the mainstream discourse, no one says boo about this. No one says, maybe Miss Freeland isn't the most objective person. Maybe she should not be having a major say in how we're going to respond to this war.
No, on the contrary, all that information about her grandfather was just kind of hand waved away as being Russian propaganda. And yeah, I agree. People aren't responsible for the actions of their parents or their grandparents, but you are somewhat responsible when you uphold your Nazi grandfather as being this like important inspiration to you, and then you go on carrying on that exact his life's work of promoting this exact kind of like right-wing Ukrainian ethno-nationalism.
Right.
Then you are kind of responsible.
And you smear people who reveal the truth.
That's right.
Totally. It certainly raises questions about your.
I would say so.
Whether you're reliable in terms of a policymaker with respect to this war. But it's a sign of the times in which we live that you get expelled from Canada for revealing facts about the foreign minister at the time, Chrystia Freeland.
Yeah, it does say a lot. And so I wanted to talk about, like, you obviously seem a bit skeptical about, this conflict kind of de-escalating. And I understand your skepticism considering how allergic people are in the West to any conversations about this, about a dialogue or a ceasefire over the last year and a half or so. It does seem like maybe there's starting to be an endpoint in sight, like in terms of the actual military activity that's been going on. There's maybe less of an appetite in certain ruling class circles to continue this endless support. And it may get to a point where they'll be forced to kind of actually go to the negotiating table and figure out, how to move forward and how to have a ceasefire. Which again, I think is a really disturbing thing, considering that like these conversations could have been happening a year and a half ago. We're here now in May 2023, and we're heading towards probably the same outcome that would have been reached a year ago with significantly less violence and bloodshed. But because there's just been this endless appetite in the West to just have this nonstop promotion of this conflict, they just refuse to ever entertain this possibility. But do you think we're getting to a point possibly where there might be an off-ramp here to de-escalate and negotiate and maybe start having some real conversations about what Ukraine is going to look like moving forward and how to kind of move past this without escalating it even further into nuclear conflict?
Well, I've been saying for years, have other people, who have a lot more military expertise than I do, people from NATO militaries, that there's virtually no prospect of Ukraine winning this war. Virtually no prospect. And, this was very simply laid out by University of Chicago professor John Mearsheimer in a recent talk he gave. And I just watched it last night, actually. I agree with everything he said. I've been saying pretty much the same thing, but not as succinctly as he put it. And he said, look, it's as simple as this. This is a war of attrition that is being waged primarily by means of artillery. That is the way in which the vast majority of the soldiers are being killed and wounded. It's through artillery. According to Western experts, pro-Ukraine Western experts, Russia has had from the very beginning and continues to have a multiple of artillery relative to Ukraine. The estimates range anywhere from 5 to 10 times as much artillery as the Ukrainian military has. And there's no sign of that disparity being narrowed substantially in the months ahead. Absolutely none. And in addition, Russia has a population which, when you take into account the millions of people who have left Ukraine, the millions of military-age men who are no longer there, no longer willing or available to serve, Russia now has a population advantage in the range of 5 to 1. So when you have 5 times as large a population to draw upon to replenish your losses, and the other side has 1/5 to 1/10 the artillery that you have, and you have and artillery is the main weapon and the main means by which soldiers are being killed and wounded, you have no hope. No hope. Your defeat is an inevitability unless Russia does something colossally stupid or NATO, God forbid, intervenes massively and directly, in which case we're straight into World War III, and I would say likely a nuclear exchange. Ukraine is doomed. That's all there is to it. I think that there are people in Western governments who now are coming to terms with that, especially after Bakhmut fell. I think it was on May 20th when its fall was formally announced. It's very clear, and you just go back and read Zelensky's statements, his own statements in the weeks leading up to the loss of Bakhmut, that Bakhmut was viewed as being a pivotal battle for the Ukrainian military. It lost decisively, it suffered huge casualties, and there's no reason to think it's going to get better from here. There may be short-term territorial gains of inconsequential pieces of land in the months ahead if Ukraine does in fact launch the much vaunted counteroffensive. But there's absolutely no reason to think that in the longer run, Ukraine can win this war. And I think that there is a growing realization about that in the halls of power in the West. The problem, as I see it, Rob, and I'd love to be wrong about this, but I think that that any proposal that the people who are making the decisions in the West would be prepared to countenance to bring an end to the war will be entirely unacceptable to Russia. So you can forget about, Russia at this stage withdrawing its troops from.
Yeah.
Crimea is out of the question, and that was always out of the question. But you might have persuaded Russia before all of this bloodshed to withdraw its troops from one or more of the 4 oblasts that it's annexed. Maybe even all of them, if there was adequate security put in place to protect the Russian speakers in the areas now controlled by Russia. That's not happening now. And I asked people this question over and over and over again when I was in Russia, including people in the Russian government, people in think tanks, people who'd served in the military. Should Russia, in your opinion, give up the territory it now controls? Let's leave out Crimea in order to see a peace deal done, assuming Russia's other demands can be satisfied, including no NATO membership for Ukraine. And the answer I got was uniformly no, absolutely not. In fact, people were worried that the Russian government would do a deal like that, and they were hopeful that the Russian government at the end of the day would say, "No, we're not giving up that territory. It's too late now." So, is anybody in the West? Is there any indication that Biden or Blinken or Nuland or Macron or Scholz or Rishi Sunak or Justin Trudeau or Chrystia Freeland would be willing to sign off on the transfer of essentially that territory that's currently controlled by Russia to the Russian Federation? There's absolutely no sign of that. Absolutely no sign of that. They're not even prepared to, as I haven't seen a single Western leader say openly, even now, as things are going into, as the situation for the Ukrainian military is rapidly deteriorating, they don't even seem willing to give up on the idea of Ukrainian membership in NATO. That's like, so from my perspective, I try to be realistic about these things. As much as I'd love to be wrong, I think the only way that we're going to get peace is we have to remove these people from office. That's it. We have to fight, especially the Biden administration, because they're the ones who are really driving this train. This is the conductor of this train, and this train is going off a cliff. And I think those people are going to take us with them. So unless we can find a way to get them out of power and put in power, people who actually see that this is a lost cause, it's going to end in Ukraine's destruction, and it may end in our destruction through a nuclear war. I just don't see a mutually acceptable peace deal being put on the table. God, I hope I'm wrong about that.
And one unfortunate thing, like I was talking about before, is like that getting rid of the Biden administration is one part of that as well. But it's like when you have only right wingers are the only ones that are kind of advancing this argument, it's also creating another dangerous situation where you're empowered, where the right is being even more empowered than it was previously. So it's like there's not a lot of good options here left.
Yeah.
Although one kind of interesting thing that I coming up over the last couple of weeks, which I found kind of interesting, is China's increasing role in all this. You've had these constant demands coming from Canada and America and other NATO countries for them to denounce the Russian invasion, which obviously is not something that they're going to do, being a really important ally of Russia right now. But they've also tried to kind of maintain their sort of stance of neutrality and non-interference throughout this whole process. I think they also recognize that while not maybe co-signing everything about the invasion, they do recognize that Russia did have legitimate security concerns in the lead up to this thing. And now they're trying to play this role as kind of international peacekeeper, not only there, but also in Syria, in Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Iran, and even in Israel, Palestine. They're starting to become more implicated. I think that's kind of an interesting phenomenon, given their kind of emerging role in the world as this kind of geopolitical leader in this new kind of multilateral geopolitical reality that's emerging here. And one interesting thing as well is that it seems like there's been even some interest from Zelensky and from the Ukrainians to have them be involved in that process. But then you have their like Western overlords being like, no way, no deal. But what do you think about that prospect of China's kind of emerging role here, and an emerging role basically as a global leader, or global peacekeeper?
Well, what China, I mean, I don't think it was just China, but China certainly played an important role in the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. That was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I never would have thought in my lifetime I was going to see those two countries essentially enter into an era of détente. But this is a different ball of wax. Where the Ukraine war, there's no question that China's government is very close to the Russian government. It's no question that they are in excellent terms. But the Chinese could mediate a rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians without compromising their own core strategic interests. In fact, their Belt and Road Initiative was facilitated, strengthened by an end of hostilities between Iran. It will be strengthened by an end of hostilities between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's a very important region for that initiative. And peace between those two powers, those two regional powers, will advance that project significantly. When you're talking about Ukraine, however, I think this is one of the most incoherent things about Western foreign policy, and there's so much about it that's incoherent. At the same time as they're trying to pressure and cajole China into using its power and influence with Russia to bring an end to this war on terms that would be acceptable to the West, they are engaged in unmitigated saber rattling and just neocon hostility and bloodthirsty warmongering against China itself. So China has been driven for its own protection and its own strategic preservation of its own strategic core interests to deepen its ties to Russia. And it knows perfectly well, the Chinese government knows perfectly well, that if the Russian government was destabilized by this war, and a very unsatisfactory outcome to this conflict could very well lead to the destabilization of this Russian government, that would make China more vulnerable. China needs Russia to withstand the pressure of the West, and particularly the immense resources that Russia possesses, and also the technology that Russia possesses, including military technologies, amongst the most advanced in the world. China needs that to withstand the isolation and the weakening that the West wants to inflict upon China. So I don't see China, trying to push, even if it could do so, the Putin government into accepting terms that would potentially destabilize the political situation in Russia. They will certainly, I think they genuinely want to see peace. I think, frankly, the Russian government genuinely wants to see peace, as long as it's on terms which protect the security of the Russian people and which protect the interests of the Russian speakers in within the 1991 boundaries of Ukraine, and keep Ukraine out of NATO. I think they want peace, but certainly the Chinese do. But are the Chinese going to do this in a way that is going to jeopardize their strategically important relationship with Russia? I just don't see that happening at all. And the way we're behaving, we're making it a guarantee that that ain't going to happen. The way
Yeah.
we're behaving towards China.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, right now, I'm the exact same people that threw gasoline on the fire here in Ukraine over the last 10 years are trying to do the exact same thing in Taiwan right now and trying to turn the Taiwanese into a proxy to destabilize China in the exact same way. So if you get their way, they're going to have a completely other front opened up there. And I think one thing China's been very clear on is that they're not going to allow that situation to happen. They're not going to allow Taiwan to be a place where the United States can go in and park missiles and aim missiles at them and continue this kind of like encirclement. This kind of military encirclement is a big factor in both Ukraine and with the situation with China right now as well, right? You have NATO expansion up to Russia's borders, in violation of the sort of the end of the Soviet Union and the agreements that were made. And you have China, as much as they're framed hilariously, as they're framed in our Western media as being like belligerent and aggressive, they are also surrounded and encircled by American military bases in Okinawa and South Korea. And in the south, you've got now AUKUS in the South China Sea, and are arming the Australians to promote there. And you have even people in Canada and like in the fucking NDP saying we need to be part of AUKUS. Why aren't we part of AUKUS? Amazingly. And still,
it's just a sick name.
it's really amazing, yeah. And they're despite that obvious security threat that represents to them, everything that they do is framed as being kind of inherently hostile and aggressive. It's completely amazing.
It's surreal. I mean, how many countries has China invaded in the post-World War II period? Who can name a country that China has invaded in the post-World War II period? What is China's military budget compared to the U.S. military budget? It's like a third of its military. How many foreign military bases does China have? I believe it has one in Djibouti.
Yeah.
That's it. Maybe it has a couple of other small bases. The United States has, just the United States, forget about the rest of NATO, has something in the range of 800 foreign military bases. So who is the aggressor? I mean, give me a break. How can anybody view China and the relationship with the West as the aggressive party? And they say, well, China's interfering with our democratic process.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But first of all, the evidence of that is extraordinarily thin. No one's really put forward a lot of evidence, but real evidence, credible evidence to support the idea that China's government is trying to pervert the course of Canadian democracy. It's
coming directly from our intelligence community, openly, working with their partners in the media.
Yes, these people who lie to courts and secret subpoena applications, like we're going to trust them. I mean, seriously, I don't trust CSIS one iota, and no Canadian should. No Canadian. But let's just suppose that there is something going on there. Okay, let's look at the attempts by Western governments to overthrow democratically elected regimes. Even if it's true that China is engaged in some form of interference covertly in our democracy or other Western democracies, it still pales in comparison to what the United States and Britain and other Western powers have done in the post-World War II period. I mentioned the case of Venezuela as a prop. They actually said that the democratically elected Venezuelan president, Maduro, whatever you may think of him, he was democratically elected, that he's not the president anymore. We in the West are going to decide who the president of the Venezuelan people is. Has China ever done that to any Western country or any other country for that matter? I mean, this is ridiculous to paint them as the aggressor.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems a lot of it too. It's creating this really, I think, toxic climate here. Like the recent accusations that came out with Olivia Chow, who's like as anti-communist as they come, and has taken every opportunity to speak out against China at every chance she's gotten. But some of the criticism was like, oh, she met with this kind of like Chinese cultural group that has basically like pushed back ever so slightly against some of the accusations that we've made about human rights, or has asked basic questions about the role that Canada has played in perpetuating these conflicts. And so we're creating this climate, I think, for like the Chinese Canadian diaspora in this case, where you're not allowed basically to express any sort of pride in China. You're not allowed to talk about the unprecedented historic development that China has been part of over the last couple of decades. You're not allowed to ask questions about these accusations about human rights or genocide that we're hurling at them from our own kind of like settler colonialist graveyard of indigenous people that we live on top of. And And it's like when Chinese people do that, when they express any kind of opinion that's remotely in line with the CPC or the of the CPC, they're framed as being some kind of like devious agents of the state, or it's like, it's basically, we're creating this climate where there's no legitimate reason for any Chinese person or anyone really to express any sympathy with the Chinese government or to push back on any of our sort of aggression and belligerence. That's the climate that's being created with these kind of accusations.
This is what's happened in Ukraine. In Ukraine, even if you're ethnically Russian, you're a Russian speaker, you've been speaking Russian your entire life, you have family members in Russia, but you're a Ukrainian citizen born, raised there. If you want to have good relations with Russia, you're basically a traitor. They now view you as a traitor. And this is where we're heading with the Chinese people living in the West. If it's a crime to want your country to which you've emigrated to have good relations with the country of your origin, that's a crime. That's a betrayal. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I remember when I was growing up, my parents came from Greece to Canada in the 1950s. They were born and raised in Greece. And I remember when I was growing up, they would say to me, Dimitri, you're a Greek first and you're a Canadian second. Now, that didn't make my parents traitors. I mean, the fact of the matter is my parents still loved Canada. They still were, law-abiding citizens who raised 4 kids here. That didn't make them traitors. I don't, by the way, feel that way myself. I don't feel nationalistic about being Greek or Canadian. I'm a citizen of both countries, and I take my responsibilities as a citizen in both countries seriously. But we've got to the stage where just wanting to have good relations with the country of your origin, if it's deemed to be a geopolitical rival of the United States and its allies, that constitutes, it's almost tantamount to treason. It's an absurdly dangerous position to be in, and this could end up causing a lot of difficulty for the Chinese people, Canadians of Chinese origin.
Yeah, and I think you hit it as well when you talk about which country has the influence over the Canadian government. It's not China, it's the United States government. Like, we're the ones that are basically a junior partner in this global imperialist project. Yeah. We take our cues from the U.S. State Department about these foreign policy issues. But this is never discussed. We're worried
about Chinese interference when our foreign policy has basically been outsourced to Washington.
Yeah, it's
it would be comical if it weren't so ridiculous, But
Well, listen, Dimitri, we've been talking for a while. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know it's getting late there. I mentioned your efforts to run for the leadership of the Green Party. I was just wondering if before we sign off, you could just talk a little bit about that experience and how that went for you, and the kind of the level of hostility that there was within that kind of structure to your sort of foreign policy views, and whether you are continuing to engage with the Green Party or whether you have any future plans to run for anything. I was just wondering if you could just get your perspective on that. I'd be interested to hear about it.
Well, as you know, Rob, there were 8 candidates. It was a ranked ballot. I finished second with about 45% of the vote. And at every step of the way, the former leader, Elizabeth May, who had vowed on national television at the time that she resigned in 2019, that she had to remain, these were her words, completely neutral in the leadership contest. At every step of the way, publicly and privately, she fought tooth and nail to undermine my campaign. She tried to keep me out of the contest. When they let me in over her vigorous objections, she tried to get me thrown out right up until the last week of the race. And as the voting was going on, Elizabeth May and the eventual winner, Annamie Paul, spoke to Global News in what can only be described as a hit piece against me, which is based upon my support for the Palestinian people and my criticism of advocates for Israel in Canada. And that was a weapon that was used against me relentlessly, was my criticisms of Israel, its supporters in Canada, and my defense of the Palestinian people. And to be honest with you, Rob, I mean, on the one hand, it was inspiring and moving that we managed to bring together so many people from the progressive community, many of whom, like you, were not traditional supporters of the Green Party, and come so close to winning. But I have to tell you, man, the day that I lost, I was very relieved because what I experienced, during those 8 months took a big toll on me, and I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. When it came around to 2022, I thought very, very long and hard about running again. And be honest with you, it actually, like, I thought I was going to get an ulcer just thinking about it. It caused me so much stress just thinking about going through that again. And
Yeah.
ultimately, one of the things which caused me to decide not to do it was, in fact, this war in Ukraine. And I wrote about this. I published a statement on my website in March of last year after making the decision. This was a month after the Russians invaded Ukraine. And one reason I cited for deciding not to run was I was going to be met yet again with the implacable hostility of Elizabeth May. And I'd had enough of that. And another reason I quoted was, and this is something that I believe this more today than I believed it even then. And that is that if I had run, I would have had to shut my mouth about this war. It's so politically, radioactive to take the positions that I have taken with respect to this war at this
Yeah.
time, that, either I was going to have to shut up, which I couldn't do as a matter of conscience, or I was going to have, I was just going to get savaged in the media, and by people within the Green Party, frankly, who have been duped by the pro-NATO propaganda, and I would have no chance of winning. So what was the whole point? I'm not willing to shut up about it. Talking the truth would have destroyed any chance of winning the leadership contest. So I just decided, this is a pointless exercise.
Well,
The last thing I want to say about
oh
the
yeah.
future, just to close it out, you asked me about that. I mean, you know, I can't see myself running to be the leader of the Green Party of Canada again. I wouldn't, and I'm not trying to be coy here. I wouldn't rule it out. If circumstances are such that it seems to me to be the best way for me to contribute in whatever way I can to the betterment of our world and our society, then I would think about it again. But it's really hard for me to imagine that at this stage, especially with Elizabeth May still there. I just think that that's just a prescription for misery.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they have much interest in like growing the party at all or really challenging power in any way. It's just become this kind of like personal little fiefdom for Elizabeth May. It's
Yeah.
great work if you can get it, but if you actually care about changing things, it doesn't seem to be a really a positive avenue for accomplishing that from my perspective. But Dimitri, I really appreciate you
Yeah.
taking the time to
Sadly,
come and yeah, exactly. I appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to me on the show. It's been fantastic to connect with you over this stuff. Looking forward to seeing what the future holds, and you're welcome to come back anytime and chat about this stuff. And thanks again. Thanks for joining us.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me. And again, I cannot thank you enough for being willing to talk honestly, openly, and intelligently about this war. We desperately need more people like you out there. So
Yeah.
Honestly, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, it's my pleasure. So we'll talk soon. Take care.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, folks. That was Dimitri LASCARIS. That was pretty wonderful stuff. And fucking somehow, like, it was totally seamless for me the whole time. I never noticed any hiccups in the stream, but I guess it went down again and came back, which is very frustrating. I never noticed any issues. I'm hoping I can like clip all that as one segment. Really annoying. I don't get what's going on with my stream lately, and whether it's me or my computer or my internet or Twitch, I have no idea. It's very minor, maybe 5-10 seconds. Okay, that's good to know. But that was a really great conversation. I appreciate Dimitri for being able to come on and talk to us. Oh, I'm connected through Ethernet, baby. That's right. What do you think? Is this amateur hour, Red Wizard? Do you think it's amateur hour? I know what I'm doing, says the guy who very well may not know what he's doing. So yeah, thanks for watching that, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that talk. Again, I know we've had a number of these discussions over the last year and a half. I'm very happy to have these discussions here on this channel. I wish we were getting this kind of discussion in any form of our mainstream media, which we're obviously not. I wish it was not like that, but it is. I don't know why. Well, we do know why, but But I should just take a time, now that we just conducted that like over hour-long interview, to remind you, first of all, thanks to Really Chill Guy, 39 minutes ago, 29 months of tier 1 resub. I appreciate that from Really Chill Guy. Useless as well, resubbed 17 months from tier 1 from Useless Teammate. Thank you, Useless. And thanks to Part Ian for the gifted sub to Aiden Jonah. And folks, if you enjoy this kind of content, if you too also think that our sort of mainstream media discourse is lacking this kind of perspective, I mean, as I've said many times, even in the name of just having like a marketplace of ideas, you'd think you could just tune into CBC or Global News or something and at least hear these discussions, even if it's being framed as the wacky extremist left thing. I don't know, but we don't even hear these kinds of conversations in our media. It's really, really frustrating. But I'm very happy to have this space here on Twitch, on TRRS, to have these conversations. But if you want to support that, if you think it's important to have this space, to have this community on twitch.tv, to have these discussions and to promote this kind of perspective, please, if you can, subscribe. Subscribe to TRRS. It's $5 per month to subscribe. You get all the wonderful emotes. You can join the amazing dynamic community here. It is completely free of charge with an Amazon Prime account. You can also gift subs, of course, if you want to do that. Also very helpful. And of course, with a gift sub of 5 subs or more, that does, of course, rocket you right up to the very top of Twitch's only 2-dimensional triangle-shaped trickle-down clout and friendship access tiered reward system known as the Friendship Triangle. Again, folks, the only way that I'm able to do this show and to have these conversations and to promote this kind of perspective is if people like you, generous chatters and community members, if you support the content that I create here on twitch.tv/Rob Rousseau. So if you can, folks, please subscribe. Help me make the number go up. It's been a rough week of streaming over here. It's been very difficult with all the sort of glitches and technical problems to be hitting my targets. I am hoping to finish out the week strong if we can. So if possible, folks, if you can, if you like the community and you like the content, please subscribe to TRRS. I appreciate it a lot. It helps a lot. And also, when you do subscribe, we become friends. Me and you. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk like you through Alana. All this. Alana is my friend. Thank you, Alana, for the 2 gifted subs. I really appreciate it. Thank you. We are friends, FR. That's true. That's absolutely correct. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. John, thank you for the gifted sub as well. I appreciate that. John McCain's Ghost. Thank you, sir. Thank you for everything you do for the community. I appreciate it. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. Osakyu.
I'm doing my part.
Thank you for the 17 months tier 1 from Osakyu. I appreciate that. Thank you. We are close to a hype train now as well. I don't want to alarm anyone. I don't want to get anyone too hyped here, but we are approaching a possible hype train situation over here. One more gifted sub or one more... You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. Carrier Wave, thank you very much for the gifted sub. I appreciate that, Carrier Wave. Thank you. So now we got a hype train going. I don't know. Do I need to do anything silly? Do I need, if I do like a funny like a dance thing, is that going to...
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Kingfisher. Oh my goodness, Kingfisher. Thank you so much for the 5 gifted subs from Kingfisher. Very much appreciated. Thank you. Very, very generous. instantly rocketing right up to the elite tier of the Friendship Triangle system. Now we're talking. And if just a few more generous chatters could get us across the finish line for this week, we could, despite a rough week of streaming.
You've just become an elite member
of
the Friendship Triangle.
Thank you, Ben Bang Boom 10. Ben Bang Boom coming through with an extremely generous 5 gifted subs as well. Ben, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Very, very kind of you. We're in level 4 of this hype train, folks, and we're getting there. We're approaching the finish line. Just a few generous chatters could get us across the finish line for this week. Again, it's been a rough week in terms of hitting my targets because of all the weird technical difficulties and issues that I've been going through on here for whatever reason. So if you enjoy the work that I do here on Twitch, if you enjoy this community, please subscribe to the channel. Help me finish out the week strong. Help keep this content on the air, right? Because again, if you enjoy the community and you enjoy the show, you enjoy the content, that's the only way that I'm able to continue doing it. Is if the extremely wonderful and generous members of this community support the show. So just a few generous chatters, folks. Just a few generous chatters could get us there. What a way to finish the week that would be. And then I can also move on from this segment. And stop doing this whole thing where I do the whole collection plate pass around. Everyone's favorite part of the stream. I think someone mentioned to me public radio and PBS and NPR and stuff like that, and it's yeah, you shouldn't feel too bad. This is actually pretty common in this business. Pass the hat around, exactly.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Vargas Prime, thank you so much for the 5 gifted subs. Thank you so much for that. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you. At least we're not talking about sports. Don't test me. That's right, Vargas. You're extremely elite.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Extremely elite. And thank you, Sikalufakis, as well, for the gifted sub. Thank you for that. Missed the last portion of the interview, but you crushed it, Rob. Thank you, Marty. I appreciate it. That was a really good one. I really appreciated talking to Dimitri about that. So, folks, literally just 2 generous chatters. We've already had a number of generous chatters come through to support the stream. Just 2, or even just 1. Just 1 generous chatter could not only get to the sub goal, but could trigger the highly exclusive and cool, rarely seen 10 gifted sub alert featuring friend of the show, Vijay Prashad. No, I'm not telling anyone what to do. I'm simply saying that's something that could happen. 2 of those things could happen at the same time, and we're actually 87% of the way through this level 4 hype train. So we're very close. We're very close to level 5, and we're very close to the goal as well. It's simply on offer. That's all I'm saying. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. Talking about interviewing people, it's just it's one of those things that's just when I was thinking about getting...
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Brian, thank you so much. Brian, a.k.a. Lennon Smesh, another elite tier member of the community and an elite streamer as well that everyone should be following. Brian, a.k.a. Lennon Smesh, Thank you for the
You
5
can count on
gifted
me.
subs.
You're going to have good old Rob to
Very
talk you
kind of
through all
you.
this.
Thank you. Mother Nature showing off as well. Thank you for the 5 months tier 1. Thank you for that. This is fantastic. Teamwork does make the dream work. That's right. I like the part when Dimitri said we have to remove those people from power. I guess like I liked that too, Carrier Wave, but that's the only thing that like I feel like needed more of a following up on in retrospect. You talk about the Biden administration's role, which is undeniable, the Biden administration's role in like prolonging the conflict and everything. But like this escalation happened under Trump as well, even though Trump or other people in the reactionary right might be saying certain things about Russia, Ukraine. That doesn't necessarily mean that even if that was replaced, because as we see in America, there's this bipartisan foreign policy establishment that doesn't seem to respond to democratic input at all. So I think, yeah, it's like that's a big part of it. But is there anyone that's running that's actually willing to do what needs to be done to rein in the power of these like intelligence agencies and NATO and all these things? Like, I don't know. Trump ran against NATO basically, and then when he became a loyal servant of NATO once he was actually in there. Yeah, the interview was very good. I'm hoping that I can crop it all as one continuous thing because it was really fantastic. Oh, I'm projecting my anti-electoralism. Yeah, no, okay. Sometimes I don't pick up on that. Sometimes I don't pick up on that nuance in the chat, but yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical about that as well as being a really meaningful way that we can impact this. I agree with you. So, folks, we got 4 more subs to go. 4 more subs to go to get to the goal, which we have not done this entire week. Is there 4 generous chatters out there that can help TRRS reach the sub goal? Help me come back a little bit from the rough week that I have had on here. 4 generous chatters or 1 very generous chatter could get us there. Arno, happy to hear that. Happy to hear that. I will be...
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Oh, my goodness.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Folks, oh my gosh. Oh my. Brian, thank you so much. Brian and AK Lennon Smesh with another 4 gifted subs. Brian, I really appreciate that. Thank you for that. Really, really appreciate that. And also Chaos the Gardener, thanks for the 3 gifted subs as well. Look at that. Wonderful. I really appreciate that, folks. Give yourself a hand, please. That's absolutely tremendous. Tremendous levels of support. I really, really, really appreciate it. You're the wind beneath my wings. Well, likewise, Brian. Thank you. Thank God first of the month is next week for the auto-renew crowd because the connection things have been a nightmare. Yeah, it's like I need to figure out what the fuck's going on here. I don't know if it's... I really have no idea at this point whether it's my computer, whether it's my... router, whether it's Twitch, whether it's Bell. I have no idea what to do here. I had a few weeks of like total, like pretty smooth sailing, and now it's this constant fucking bullshit that's going on. It's pretty annoying. It's pretty annoying. It was Twitch, you, David, and I had issues. Well, maybe that's part of it. Yeah, maybe it's some combination because I know my computer's been messed up. My router's been fritzy. Twitch has been fritzy. It's just everything's being fritzy. Love when there are 2 to 3 oligarchies in the way of your revenue stream. Yeah. There's like 3 different tech monopolies and telecom monopolies giving me issues here lately. Oh, goodness. So we'll just wait for this hype train to run out. We got another 2.5 minutes. If anyone does, we did hit the goal, which I appreciate. So I'm very happy with that. If anyone else wants to support the channel or wants to subscribe, if you're a lurker or a non-sub member and you like the community and you you've missed out on the gift subs. Please do continue to subscribe if you want. I'm not going to guilt trip anyone over it. Okay. I'm not going to, hold up a knife creepily and threaten you until you subscribe or gift subs. We do. There is an all-time hype train record in the horizon, but we're 6% of the way there. So I think it's probably unlikely today. But if anyone wants to contribute to that, I'm not going to stop you. Believe me. It's like I said, it's been a bit of a rough week hitting my targets. So really the goal this week is more of a guideline. It's not like a hard and fast. It's not like a hard and fast rule. It's our limit. Run the ad. Okay, we could do that. We can do that. I'm trying to create a new ad with AI. It's difficult though. The ad has not been shelved. I find the ad is not really, people like it, and they should like it because it's very entertaining, but hasn't been a huge resource in terms of actually getting people to subscribe to the channel. I like it a lot, but here we go. And if you're a, is this it? No. That's not what you want. You don't want to see that. Where's my window? Why don't I see it? What the hell's going on? There we go. Okay, so if you're new to the community, if you're a lurker, if you're not sure what this is about, we got 40 seconds left. Maybe if another 20 subs come in, we might beat the goal, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But if you're new to the community, you don't know what it's about, here's what it's about.
Thank you for expressing interest in the Friendship Triangle community. We would be thrilled to have you on board as a member of our exclusive platform. As you may know, the Friendship Triangle is Twitch's only two-dimensional, triangle-shaped, friendship access and trickle-down clout tiered reward system. Today you have an amazing opportunity to join the base level of the Friendship Triangle system. Once you are part of the community, you'll have the ability to rise through the ranks and achieve higher levels of access and rewards. One way to do this is by gifting subscriptions to your fellow members or by inviting your friends and family members to join our community. As you ascend the tiers, you will be exposed to a range of new and exciting benefits, such as exclusive content, advanced features, and access to our elite community members. We are confident that you will enjoy all the perks that come with being part of the Friendship Triangle. However, we also want to remind you that not all friends and family members are to be trusted, especially those who may not support your new lifestyle. That's why we encourage you to focus on building meaningful relationships within our community, where you will find like-minded individuals who share your interests and values. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. We are always here to support our members and ensure that your experience with the Friendship Triangle is enjoyable. We're glad that you are considering joining the Friendship Triangle community. We look forward to seeing you rise through the Chaos Zone and all the way into the Elite tier. It's not a cult.
There we go. That's what it's about. That's what it's all about, folks. In case you were concerned about any of that stuff. In case you were concerned about that. It actually isn't. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for supporting the stream. Really, I really, really appreciate it a lot. I really do. Thank you again. So I'm going to be here for another little bit, hour or so. Maybe I'm sure there's some kind of video content that we can watch. I'm going to take a little break just to go to the bathroom, get some water or something. I'll put on a little audio visual interlude for you. Okay, we'll do that. And then I will come back and we'll do some more good stuff. How about that? How about that? Okay, so just give me a moment and I will be back in just a few. I'll leave you with this little audio-visual presentation I've prepared for you. And don't go anywhere, okay? Red Wizard. Talk to you soon. Yo. Hello. Hello. What's up, folks? Are you with me? Did I lose you? Did I lose you again? I'm not mute. No, I'm not muted. No. No. Anyway, here I am. Got a nice ice cold water. I actually went and sat out on my patio for like 3 minutes there as well. May or may not. It's a beautiful day here. And I guess it's supposed to be super hot this weekend. Beautiful day here in Montreal. Beautiful. And went and sat out on the patio for a few minutes there just so I'm not just sitting in my chair staring at my screen for the entire day. A little sit out on the patio for just a few little minutes there before I come back into the online world. Before I jack back in. May or may not have had a little tiny puff of a little something. I can neither confirm nor deny whether anything was puffed or vaped or what have you, whatever the lingo is. A little bit of the devil's kale. I've never heard that one. I've heard devil's lettuce, but kale, that's like the superfood version. That's like the yuppie version. A nice Dr. Pepper. That'd be nice right about now. I did the other day have one of those, it was a cherry Dr. Pepper Zero, which was pretty good. You get the devil's kale at the hipster dispensary. That's right. Yeah. The devil's arugula. So I think we got another little video we can check out here along the same lines, excuse me, as what we were just talking about. God, I look kind of unhinged in this image here that I shared earlier. That was a really good conversation with DIMITRI LASCARIS earlier. That was good stuff. I'm going to make sure to clip that, and hopefully I can do that relatively easily. That was a really good one. It's funny, like I'm did not prepare for that at all. Did not prepare for that interview. People were talking about my interviewing skills. I had wanted to make, like I said, I would like to sometimes write down some bullet points or something. You know, sometimes when you're doing an interview, I don't want to think about it too much, but I want to just have a little like roadmap to cover all the things that I want to cover. Wasn't really able to do that this time, but it's like, you know what? I've been having enough conversations about Russia and Ukraine over the last 2 years or more, really. I don't know. I've been talking about this for a couple years now. I feel pretty comfortable just having someone on the show and just having a conversation with them about it, especially someone who has like a kind of like-minded viewpoint on it, as Dimitri does. Hello, Diego. I just dined with my mom and all the residents of nearby Gallo Hill in the community house, and they made a delicious tikka masala, and they have those community dinners because the place is filled with nice socialists, so I couldn't be more pleased. That sounds lovely. That sounds lovely to me. Diego? Y'all speak the same language and it shows. Yeah, and I think it's like there's been a lot of frustration for me, definitely, that these conversations haven't been going on really for the last year and a half. Obviously, Dimitri's frustrated as well. I think we've both been attacked by people for taking certain stances over the last year and a half that are not very popular in our discourse or in our culture. So I think it's nice to kind of like connect with people that have kind of been involved in that. I may have missed whether or not Mr. LASCARIS stated explicitly that Putin bad, though. More clarity be appreciated. Actually, that's the really unfortunate thing, because when the stream went down for like a few seconds, not very long, but just a few seconds, and that was actually the moment that both me and Dimitri were like, by the way, Putin bad, just to be clear. Big time Putin haters over here. We said that, and then for some reason the stream kind of hiccuped. When we were making that clear to everyone, so hopefully there's no confusion. Where's my mouse? Is lose my mouse? What's happening? Really? I know there's battery in my mouse. Or not. What's going on here? What's going on here then? Okay, there's my mouse. So anyway, I think this could be a good video to spend the rest of the day looking at. It's friend of the show, Ben Norden, at the Geopolitical Economy Report. And he has a video just from 4 days ago about U.S.-led post-9/11 wars. Also interesting in the context of that annoying conversation that I saw taking place online with like the socialism done left crowd about like Iran. Of course Iran's worse than the United States. Why are these tankies defending Iran? And just like ignoring the fact that by any measurable stretch, the United States, in terms of their global influence, significantly worse than Iran could ever hope to be. And then people, even when I was making this argument, you know, about American imperialism, people say, no, it's about people that live in America, though. Like, we know America does bad things around the world, but, you know, Iran, look, it's so much more repressive. And it's like, yeah, for some people living in the West, living in America, it's not repressive at all. And you have a lot of rights and freedoms and the ability to speak out, the ability to protest, the ability to use free speech and not be punished for it. And people, because they have these privileges, they think that everyone in our society enjoys these same privileges. Like, not only did they kind of hand wave away the way like Western imperialism affects people around the world, it's not just about whether you live in America or not. Not only did they hand wave that away, but they think that the privileged upbringings they've had, and I've certainly had a privileged upbringing in terms of like whether I've been repressed or not, you know, absolutely. Of course, I've got these freedom of speech and all kinds of things. For me, I haven't had a lot of restrictions on that, but it's also not accurate in any way to pretend that the freedoms that you've enjoyed are enjoyed by every single person in your society or that lives in Canada or the United States. Like marginalized groups, indigenous folks, like the idea that it's because you're not personally repressed, that we don't have an even more ridiculously repressive society is just doesn't occur to these people. I was trying to point to the famously not repressive to the indigenous, exactly. And I was trying to point out the prison system. Like, you're going to complain about Iran being repressive while saying, like, of course we have all these freedoms. If you live in the imperial core, we have all these wonderful freedoms that Iranians don't have. But like, who's got the larger, even you're talking about people that live in the country, who has the world's largest, most repressive prison system? Is it Iran or the United States? You know, ask the people that are languishing in this prison system in places like Rikers Island, where they haven't even been sentenced they haven't even been sentenced. They haven't been like formally charged with a crime. There's people languishing in these prisons for months or years, or dying in these places. Do they have the same? Are they being repressed? Do they have these like privileges of living in the imperial core? The millions and millions of people, the people fucking dying every single day in the United States prison system, the people being tortured to death, dying of starvation, being beaten to death, being shot by armed agents of the state, being eaten alive by fucking insects in the United States of America? Do they have these wonderful freedoms of living in the imperial core? No, I don't really think they do. I think many millions of people in our society actually are indeed extremely repressed, and are experiencing just as much torture or horror or oppression as anyone in these like enemy regimes that you can point to. You know? So people completely ignore this point. And again, every single tweet that I see coming from this Socialism Done Left account, before we move on from this, seems to be going after, they're not talking so much about socialism and talking about America's official enemies and talking about why we shouldn't support them or have solidarity with them. Countries that have been victimized by Western imperialism, whether they're socialist or not. It seems to be that's one of their main things that they talk about over on that Socialism Done Left account, which seems kind of odd to me. Couldn't be me personally, but maybe I'm built different. Anyways, I think on that subject and talking about Russia and Ukraine and the grandstanding around that, we talked about earlier with DIMITRI. There's a great video coming up from our friend of the show, Ben Norton, from the Geopolitical Economy Report, who's had a funny pause face this entire time. It could have been this face the whole time, and it was the silly pause face. We're the good imperfect, but they're the bad imperfect. Of course, that's a good way of looking at it. But yeah, let's talk about U.S. post 9/11 wars that caused 4.5 million deaths and displaced 38 to 60 million people. It's truly staggering the level of criminality, the level of violence that we have inflicted around the world, which makes all the accusations about Russia and Chinese aggression, it makes all these accusations just completely fucking ridiculous and farcical. You know, not that Russia doesn't also have blood on its hands during this war on terror process, of course, but the idea that we hold them up as being like uniquely violent or something, or the Chinese as being uniquely aggressive, I mean, it's just fucking preposterous. And, you know, this should prove that to anybody. Anyone who thinks that someone like somewhere like Iran or the DPRK have a more pernicious influence around the globe and are more of a repressive society than us. Like when you're not only are we repressing people, as I said, millions of people in the prison system, predominantly indigenous people, predominantly black and brown people, or disproportionately rather, not predominantly. We also commit horrific violence around the world. And like, you can't just hand wave that away or pretend that it doesn't happen when you're talking about whether a country is repressive or not. Yeah, it's not repressive to you, the person like running the Socialism Done Left Twitter account where you attack America's enemies all day, but it's extremely repressive to many millions of people, both domestically and internationally. So let's watch this video. Here's Ben Norton talking about these US-led post 9/11 wars, which Canada, of course, was also deeply implicated in, causing 4.5 million deaths, displacing 38 to 60 million people. We're the human rights respecters have logged on. The human rights respecters, the democracy lovers, the authoritarianism cops or fighters. We've logged on. Because you know what? It's not that, we do bad things, but other countries are worse. No, we are the bad guys. This is the one thing people just they can't take this step. They get some of the way there. Some people get close to accepting this, but they just can't take that final step. They can't take that final step to just fucking understand the real truth, which is that we are the bad guys. We are the baddies, okay? It's as simple as that. So let's watch this video. I still love Fortunate Son as well, O'Dane. I don't think Vietnam movies have ruined that music. They always have good. They always use Credence, like in like every Vietnam movie, to signify the time. They bring in the Credence, but Credence is timeless. Okay, Credence is just fucking fantastic, no matter what. There's no getting around that. Here's Ben Norton.
The wars that the United States waged after September 11th, 2001 resulted in the deaths of 4.5 million people and displaced between 38 million and 60 million people. That is according to studies done at Brown University, which is an Ivy League school, one of the most prestigious universities in the United States. Scholars there looked at the devastating consequences of the wars that the United States waged in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Libya, Somalia, and Pakistan following the 9/11 attacks. This is the real deadly legacy of the so-called War on Terror that Washington launched in response to the attacks on the World Trade Center. And we see the consequences still today. The report emphasized that still today, millions of civilians are suffering in extreme poverty and hunger and are still dying because of the consequences of these wars, despite the fact that the U.S. military withdrew from countries like Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan are still suffering and dying because of the consequences of that war. Now, for people who want to get access to all of the sources that I'll be discussing today, so you can fact check what I'm saying, I have an article over at geopoliticaleconomy.com, which I'll link to in the description below, and it includes links to all of the reports and other sources that I'll be discussing today. The academic study that found that 4.5 million people died because of the post-9/11 wars was written by scholars at the Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs at Brown University, and they run a very useful project that's called Costs of War, and they've published a series of reports. Back in 2021, they published another study that looked at the number of people displaced by U.S. wars following 9/11, and they wrote 38 million people have been displaced, becoming
This to me is like the staggering number as well. Like this, we talk about the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, we talk about like U.S. troop deaths, or there's different like measurements of civilian casualties. You have some people that undercount the civilian casualties, and you have other NGOs and other organizations that have like estimated to be way more. But when you talk about the 38 million people being displaced, the refugee crises that have been created as well, I think that's so underrepresented in the conversations that we have about this and the impact of these wars, where it's not just about people dying, but dying directly in the bombs and in the fighting, but the people that are suffering after, that are displaced, that are living in refugee camps and fucking dying, washing up in the Mediterranean or in the Thames or wherever. I think we really, when we talk about the absolute brutal violence that these wars have created, I think we really often underrepresent this aspect. 38 million, it's staggering. It's a staggering number of people. It's a staggering number of refugees. It's really even hard to wrap your mind around. But that's why I'm appreciating that this study focuses on this, and Ben is taking the time to talk about it on his channel as well.
Becoming refugees seeking safety in another country, or becoming internally displaced people within their own country as a result of the wars the U.S. military has fought since 2001. That is more than those displaced by any war or disaster since the start of the 20th century, except for World War II. By the way, they also stressed in the report that 38 million is a very conservative estimate. The total displaced by the U.S. post 9/11 wars could be closer to 49 to 60 million people, which would rival the displacement caused by World War II. The study concluded that 6 million people were displaced in Afghanistan, 4 million in Pakistan, nearly 5 million in Yemen, 4 million in Somalia, 2 million in the Philippines, a country where the U.S. military was involved in so-called counterterrorism operations as part of the war on terror, although it's not often discussed, 9 million in Iraq, 1 million in Libya, and 7 million in Syria. And again, they stress that this is just a very conservative estimate. Now, the latest
7.1
report
million
released
people in
by
Syria.
Brown University's Cost of War Project was published this May, and it's titled How Death Outlives War: The Reverberating Impact of the Post 9/11 Wars on Human Health. Now, this report is 39 pages long, so obviously I'm not going to go through all of it. It would take too much time. But I want to go through some of the main highlights. I read every page of the report, and I summarized some of the main points from my report today. And the report is divided here in several parts. One focuses on the effects of economic collapse and food insecurity due to war. It also focused on the destruction of health infrastructure and public services, on the contamination of the environment, and the continued reverberating trauma and violence that echoes still today after these 2 decades of U.S. wars. The report begins with a very straightforward summary, which is their main findings. They found that the total death toll in the post 9/11 war zones of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen could be at least 4.5 to 4.6 million and counting, although the precise mortality figure remains unknown. And once again, these are also conservative figures. They note that around 1 million,
Staggering.
over 900,000, close to 1 million of these people were directly killed in fighting. However, far more, especially children, have been killed by the reverberating effects of war, such as the spread of disease. The scholars attribute 3.6 to 3.7 million deaths to indirect causes, largely because of health problems and economic problems caused by the war.
I don't want to go too far down this road as well, but I think it's this, like what we're hearing from him now, like this is what I think I find extra grotesque about the ways that in Canada and the US, we've taken China's response to terrorism and separatism and the destabilization and violence that was happening because of that, partially because of these conflicts, or maybe just directly because of them. And we've called their response to this genocide, and where our governments have formally accused them of committing genocide for this policy, which you can point out the whatever the problems you have about the ways that privacy or human rights are not respected in this process, but just comes nowhere near this level of brutality and violence and evil. Like, say what you want about it, but it's been this process of trying to combat terrorism and extremism through these like vocational schools and giving like education and getting people out of these like radicalization cycles, and maybe pulling in people that maybe were not even susceptible to that or were not even part of it. Like, we can talk about that, but you really are going to compare that to this, where millions of people have died? We're accusing them of genocide, and we can't even name one person that's died. Not one. You can look at all these accusations online. They can't name like one individual that has actually been killed in this genocide, which we've done. And not only do we accuse them of that, but if I go on the Rob Rousseau show on twitch.tv and ask these questions, I get called a genocide denier, right? Or if you're part of the Chinese diaspora and you say like, I don't know about this, can we like, maybe we should be pumping the brakes on these accusations, or I think we should ask more questions about it. You get accused of being like a brainwashed dual loyalty CPC automaton. And it's absurd to me when we compare our war on terror and the absolute violence and misery that we inflicted on millions and millions of people and death versus this policy which they engaged in, which we have held up as been this irrefutable proof of their horrific human rights record. It's just so repulsive. And China recognizes this. And you know what? So do other countries around the world. This is why we're losing control of this narrative. This is exactly why, like, we're seeing this emergence of this multipolar world or multilateralism. It's exactly why countries in the global south have backed China on their policy in Xinjiang, and they've refused to get on board with our side in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, that's the exact reason, because they know that it's bullshit. They know that we're completely hypocritical when we make these accusations. They know that we're not doing anything for humanitarian reasons or supporting democracy or anything like that. People around the world are not they're not living in this vast advanced propaganda machine like we are, so they're able to understand this basic discrepancy when we're lecturing them about human rights after just living on this mountain of corpses. Not only the mountain of corpses that founded our societies, but like just over the last 20 years and the wars that have been going on. People around the world recognize how preposterous that is. And it's amazing to me still that living in the imperial core, you still get there's still people that are swayed by these arguments that we're somehow the lesser evil around the world. It's just it's really a perfect encapsulation, I think, of the ways that we are the most heavily propagandized and brainwashed people in the entire world, while we're simultaneously accusing everyone around the world of being exactly that.
And in the case of Afghanistan, even though the US military technically withdrew, today Afghans are suffering and dying from war-related causes at higher rates than ever. Now, also in this report, they looked at the effects of the NATO war on Libya and the US military operations in Somalia. So they looked at Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Somalia. And as is always in the case in wars and violent conflicts, the report emphasized that the groups that suffer the most from these wars are marginalized groups, especially women and children, who suffer the brunt of the ongoing impacts of the wars. Now, in the vast majority of wars throughout history, up to today, the vast majority of people who lose their lives do so because of indirect causes. They're referred to as indirect deaths. They die because hospitals or health centers are destroyed in the war, so they don't have access to health treatment, or roads are destroyed, so they don't have the roads to drive on to go to the hospital, or they simply die because water treatment facilities are destroyed and they can't get access to clean water and they get a disease, or they die because their livelihoods are destroyed, their farm or their business is destroyed and they have no way of surviving, and if they can't flee, then they often die of starvation or something. So this is not unique to these post 9/11 wars that the US waged, but the report highlights the devastating consequences. It notes that,
Johnny, when are we talking? Okay. Most nights, Johnny, I'm free after 9 p.m. If your stream is later than that. I know you do stuff on Fridays, which generally is not great for me because I'm usually with my son. But even after he goes to after he goes to sleep, I'm free to do stuff. So let's find a time to do that.
In the wake of the U.S. war in Afghanistan, tens of thousands of children under 5 are dying of infectious diseases like cholera and measles. Also, they're dying of acute malnutrition. Their bodies are literally wasting away, or because of neonatal complications after they're born. Indirect deaths are attributable to the deterioration of economic, social, psychological, and health conditions due to war. The large majority of indirect war deaths occur due to malnutrition, pregnancy, and birth-related problems, and many illnesses include infectious diseases and non-communicable diseases like cancer. Also, it's due to war's destruction of infrastructure such as traffic signals and trauma and interpersonal violence. As an example of a past U.S. war, they noted that in the war that the United States waged on Korea in the 1950s, 5 to 6 million Koreans died. I repeat that, 5 to 6 million deaths. And as a result, about 20% were direct and 80% were indirect deaths.
Horrific.
So, the U.S. destroyed Korea. The devastation, the borderline genocidal war that the U.S. waged on Korea is just unthinkable. About 1 million were killed in the bombing and destruction, and the U.S. destroyed 80% of the buildings in Korea. But furthermore, about 5 million died indirect causes, which the great majority was by starvation and other war causes.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, Marty. Like, Marty says, does anyone have the count that it's memorialized for the Holocaust? We've passed that already now a few times over. I think about that a lot too, because we're told correctly, mind you, we're told to never forget, that the Nazis killed 6 million Jews, count the several other million, socialists and communists, trade unionists, Roma people, LGBTQ people, and countless others during World War II. And we're supposed to remember that. And we absolutely should. And that's important that we don't forget that. But when we go in and just kill 6 million Koreans, we were trying to bring them, democracy. So that's just the cost of that. It's just, not only do we not forget, they call it the forgotten war, literally, because we did forget. We literally, that's just Korea. You look at the legacy from after the war to today. And like a lot of this report that we're talking about here is about the war on terror, just the last 20 years. It's just a staggering number of people that we have killed in this process of being the global hegemon, or Canada being its junior partner. And we correctly talk about the crimes of Nazi Germany, and we very correctly remember the people that were killed by Nazi Germany, even though we don't count the Soviets, obviously. The 27 million Soviet citizens that died, they're not really, the whole never forget thing didn't apply to them either. But again, we kill 6 million Koreans in the Korean War, and it's just it's just an afterthought. Or Vietnam, or all of Southeast Asia in the 50s and 60s, including like Indonesia and these other regions where we were involved in coups and anti-communist repression campaigns. It's just a staggering number of people, and it's just nothing to us. It's nothing. It's sick. It really is. This is a good pause face. Also, the Korean deaths were the icing on the cake after what they subjected to for decades under Japanese authority. I mean, that's the ultimate cruelty. Yeah. Living under that brutal colonialism for such a long period of time, they free themselves through fucking brutal armed struggle and liberate themselves from that. And then we come in, put Japanese back in charge, artificially partition the country, and then just destroy every bit of their infrastructure and kill 6 million people. And people still, just with that, people still don't want to admit or acknowledge or recognize our role in global politics, or want to still pretend to this day that we have some kind of credibility or some argument to make when it comes to human rights and democracy and all this stuff, or that when it comes to Russia and Ukraine that we're on the side of good. No. Again, people are just not able to take that extra step. Like I was saying, they got right up there sometimes, but they're not able to take that final step to recognize this basic idea.
Brown University scholars pointed out that in conflict areas, children are 20 times more likely to die of diarrhea than they are from the conflict itself. And by the way, when we're talking about deaths, which is of course the ultimate loss, the ultimate tragedy,
for sure,
it's also very easy to forget about the other tragedies, like the millions, tens millions more people who suffer from injuries and diseases, but who don't lose their lives. The study pointed out, for instance, that for every person who dies of a waterborne disease because war destroyed their access to safe drinking water and waste treatment facilities, there are many more people who get sick. So when a bomb destroys a rural hospital and local people lose access to healthcare, it results in higher death rates from illness and birth complications as well. In addition to the devastating death toll of 4.5 million, this study also estimated that more than 7.6 million children under age 5 are suffering today in these countries due to the US wars from acute malnutrition, which is wasting away. Wasting in this case quite literally means that the children do not have enough food, so they are wasting to skin and bones. Their muscles are being eaten by their body so they don't starve to death, which obviously puts these children at a much greater risk of death. There is a horrifying graph that they included in this study, which looks at the rates of child malnutrition in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and compared it to the US. And it shows the percentage of children who are wasting away, their body mass is being eaten away from starvation.
Yeah, I mean, effusive stoic. I mean, to look no further than Canada with that actively hostile to even acknowledging the continued native genocide. You don't talk about the past. You don't talk about the present either. Like in Canada, like, you know, remember we had the big high profile stories about the graves outside of residential schools, and there was a whole national conversation about that. And we lowered the flags for like 6 months. And now basically the accepted position from like the commentariat in the Canadian like opinion columnist class is like the Terry Glavin, oh, it was a hoax thing. The hoax of the mass graves outside the residential schools. And that's basically what they've that's basically the, oh, I'm so brave for acknowledging this like controversial stance. That's basically what passes for like the mainstream opinion on that phenomenon for our like journalist class. You know? It's extremely sickening.
And in Afghanistan and Yemen, around 50%, half of children are wasting away due to starvation. And in Somalia, nearly 60% of children are wasting away due to starvation. So that means that in Afghanistan, there are 3 million children basically on the verge of starving to death. In Yemen, 2 million. And in Somalia, another nearly 2 million children. In addition to children suffering, women also bear serious consequences from these conflicts. The study said that whereas men were more likely to die in combat, women and children were more likely to be killed by the reverberating impacts of the war. And also people in rural areas who tend to be poorer and have less access to state services, they are more likely to die as well. So the study noted that people who suffer from societal injustices due to poverty, gender, race, ethnicity, and or the legacies of colonialism have a higher risk. And of course, poverty is statistically associated with higher mortality rates and lower life expectancy. So clearly, if you're poor, you don't have many opportunities to get out of the country, to move. Whereas if you're rich, you can, find a new place that's safer. And the report pointed out, this is obvious, but it deserves emphasizing that the post 9/11 wars and the so-called war on terror occurred in countries whose populations are largely black and brown and are often waged war against by colonialist and imperialist countries with histories of white supremacy and Islamophobia. Now, the report doesn't mention imperialism because they focus simply on the identity element of
like weenus. You joke around, but like that's the mainstream opinion on all this stuff, right? That's basically what passes for analysis in like most of our education system and all of our media and political class. Like we're building a victims of communism memorial in Ottawa. Like it's just, and the whole Black Ribbon Day thing. Like it's been really mask off this whole phenomenon the last couple of years. Yeah, historical revisionism is their new weapon. Well, not even new. We're living through the culmination of the decades of work. They've been laying the groundwork to promote a certain narrative about our past, about World War II, about what our values are currently. There's been this decades-long project, and it's worked extremely well. Like I said, the most advanced, well-funded propaganda machine, propaganda panopticon ever devised by humanity. That's what we live in. And it's been very successful at rewriting history and revising it and convincing people that we are not the bad guys, that we do care about these values. It's been remarkably successful. The German communities gave up their socialism and abolitionist sensibilities. The Irish gave up their strong republicanism and will to return. The Italians gave up their anarchism and any solidarity with other Mediterranean peoples. Yeah, you're talking about these like different immigrant groups eventually being accepted as white because they gave up these things and then were willing to sacrifice their culture into purely kitsch novelty, sausages, alcohol, and one-dimensional stereotypes. Yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at that. The Ukrainian communities as well. And partially these things were intentionally destroyed, right? We talk about the importing these Ukrainian fascists into a Ukrainian community that was very left-wing, that was very socialist, and we injected these fascists into these communities just as we've done with a lot of reactionary immigrants in a lot of different ethnic groups over the last couple of decades. We inject these reactionaries into these communities like white blood cells, so they can take over the thing and become eventually like take over the sort of political characteristics and steer it in that pro-empire direction. Well, that's kind of it's kind of an inescapable conclusion, Johnny. No matter what we do, it might be because I'm succession pilled right now, but we need a fucking left-wing Rupert Murdoch. I think that's one main lesson for me for the last 5 years since I got more involved in talking about and thinking about these things and socialism and all this stuff, seeing the immense power that the state wields and the idea that we don't have state media. As we've talked about, the state, it's not just the government, it's this machine that works on behalf of the ruling class to promote their interests and wage class war against us. And the media, the corporate media machine, is very much part of the state. And they're extremely powerful in altering people's perceptions, at inventing reality or manufacturing consent or whatever you want to call it. They're extremely effective at this. They're really, really good at it. And we see it affect our parents and our friends and people that we know and people that we think have good values. We see the immense power that these media institutions wield. So yeah, that's part of it. Having a left-wing Rupert Murdoch, or as certain others have advocated, if we seize the means of controlling these media institutions, then you can, start to have some kind of impact. We lack any sort of large-scale media from a left-wing project. Yeah, even CGTN or Chinese state media doesn't really go that far. But as we've seen with RT as well, even when there is even anything remotely and I don't want to call RT left-wing propaganda, but I will say that RT would often air left-wing views as part of their coverage. Overall, it's promoting the views of the Russian state, but they would still hire people like Abby Martin to make content on their networks, which of course would never happen in the West. But even that, we've seen when they get to a certain level of saturation, the state in the West has the power to just be like, no, you're not allowed. You're not allowed. And they'll kick them out. They've used the pretext of the Ukraine conflict to just kick them out. So even if you see a well-funded propaganda arm coming from a foreign sort of sourcing, they have the ability to censor it and repress it and to stamp it out ultimately. Yeah, ideally a actual, not a liberal, but an actual left-wing organization with actually the kind of financial backing that these major media institutions have would be something that would be a pretty interesting development. But is that something that we see happening anytime soon? I'm not so sure. There are some billionaires with vaguely liberal values, but that's about as far as it goes. And in fact, you'd argue that you don't get to be a billionaire in the West while holding any sort of remotely left-wing views.
Of Islamophobia and white supremacy, which is part of it. But I should emphasize imperialism. These are wars of imperial conquest to control regions of the world that are geostrategically important because they have large hydrocarbons reserves that the US wants to exploit, oil and gas. They're geostrategically located in the case of a country like Somalia on the eastern coast of Africa, the Horn of Africa, where a huge percentage of international trade goes through every single day. The war in Yemen also is right there on the Bab al-Mandab, the Mandab Strait, where every single day there are more than 3 million barrels of oil who go through. So these are imperialist wars, and we're talking about millions of human beings who have lost their lives in this war, these wars for US empire. Now, this report is one of the more conservative reports that we've seen out there looking at the death toll of wars waged by the United States. Others have had even higher death tolls. For instance, they pointed to a 2006 scholarly article that was published in The Lancet, which is a leading medical journal. And that article found that 600,000 Iraqis had died just due to the violence of the war between 2003 and 2006. So when they say that 4.5 million people have died because of these US wars, I need to stress again, this is a conservative estimate. Now, I talked about how the majority of lives lost in pretty much all wars is due to indirect deaths. And this study pointed out that this is largely because of economic collapse, loss of livelihood, and food insecurity. And they summarize saying that the post 9/11 wars have caused widespread economic hardship for people in the war zones, and poverty in turn has been accompanied by food insecurity and malnutrition, which have led to diseases and death, particularly among children under age 5. And furthermore, in addition to the wars with US boots on the ground, the US drone wars that Washington has waged against countries like Pakistan, in addition to Afghanistan and Somalia, have resulted in consequences like destroying the livelihood sources of poor and working people, so they starve to death, and U.S. so-called counterterrorism restrictions in places like Somalia has hampered the delivery of humanitarian food aid, which has fueled famine and mass starvation. One of the most horrifying examples of this is Afghanistan, where the study says today Afghanistan's economy has collapsed and over half of the population now lives in extreme poverty on less than $2 per day. I repeat, half of the entire population of Afghanistan. In the entire country, there are about 40 million people. So 20 million people are in extreme poverty today. And 95% of Afghans are not getting enough food to eat. Women-led households, 100% are not getting enough food to eat. 19 million people were acutely food insecure in 2022. 4 million children are acutely malnourished or wasting away. They don't have enough food and their body is literally consuming itself. 1 million Afghan children are at risk of death. Now, a point that this report doesn't mention, but I want to stress, is that this is because of the economic war that the United States continues to wage of Afghanistan after withdrawing. The United States has imposed sanctions on Afghanistan, and Washington stole $9 billion in foreign exchange reserves belonging to the Afghan central bank. So stealing the country's savings, essentially, which has caused hyperinflation because there is no foreign exchange reserves in the central bank. They can't get access to more hard currency because of Western sanctions. So their currency has completely devalued. It's basically worthless. And because average Afghans are paid in the local currency and they don't have access to foreign currency, they can't afford to buy food. So they're starving to death. The U.S. is causing a famine in Afghanistan
after 20 years
through its sanctions and its theft
difficult
of the Afghan central bank's foreign exchange reserves. So despite the U.S. military officially leaving Afghanistan after 20 years of military occupation and hundreds of thousands of deaths, now the U.S. continues to wage economic war in Afghanistan. The story is not dissimilar in Iraq. Still today, the U.S. military has troops occupying Iraq illegally. despite the fact that the Iraqi parliament voted unanimously in 2020 in January when Donald Trump murdered the top Iranian general Qasem Soleimani and the top Iraqi general Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes. The Iraqi parliament voted unanimously to expel the U.S. military troops that are occupying their country, and Washington refused. It's still occupying Iraq today, and the children of Iraq are still suffering the consequences of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. The report from Brown University noted that in Iraq, the U.S.-led war has been, among other factors, contributing to widespread child malnutrition. The primary drivers of death among Iraqi children under age 5 are lower respiratory tract infections, diarrhea, and measles, all of which are easily preventable or curable if the country actually had the resources that it needs, which it doesn't because of the war and the U.S.'s destruction of its health sector. In Syria, which is also still under U.S. military occupation illegally, there are similar problems, including polio, measles, typhoid, influenza, acute diarrhea, and other illnesses that are also easily preventable or treatable. And in Yemen, a war that the United States backed, that was waged through Saudi Arabia, but acting as a U.S. and a British proxy, flying U.S. planes, using U.S. missiles, following the orders of the U.S. military, with U.S. and British military officials physically in the command and control room for the Saudi military operations. Due to that war and the Saudi blockade on the northern part of Yemen, where the majority of the civilian population lives, there has been an economic collapse and a hunger catastrophe. More than 17 million Yemenis are food insecure, and 7 million facing emergency levels of hunger. An estimated 85,000 Yemeni children under age 5 have likely died due to starvation in Yemen due to this war backed by the US and Britain. I mentioned that the US drone war, which is waged ostensibly in order to protect lives, has also devastated the lives of people living in countries that are targeted by US drones, like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia. And the report noted that US airstrikes in Somalia damaged farms and livestock. This led to a severe impact and the destruction of livelihoods of populations who depend on the land for their survival. And the report warned this effect cannot be underestimated. In Somalia, so-called U.S. counterterrorism laws have hampered humanitarian relief efforts, intensifying the effects of famine. In 2011, the United Nations declared a famine in a certain region of Somalia where the fascist extremist group Al-Shabaab is active, and at least 258,000 people, including 133,000 children under age 5, died from 2010 until 2012. And the U.S. sanctions and counterterrorism laws prevented humanitarian aid from going to that region, which could have saved some of those people who starved to death. And today, in 2023, Somalia is facing the possibility of another famine. Another so-called causal pathway highlighted by this report, which leads to indirect deaths in these wars, is the destruction of hospitals, clinics, and medical supplies, water and sanitation systems, electricity, roads, and traffic signals, infrastructure for farming and shipping goods, and much more. All this infrastructure is destroyed, damaged, or disrupted with devastating and lasting consequences for humans. Those were just some of the main points that I wanted to highlight in this report. Like I said, it's pretty long and it's pretty repetitive, but those are the main points to take away. And I want to conclude here just simply reflecting on the fact that it's common to hear people claim that the world has been so peaceful under US hegemony since the overthrow of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the end of the First Cold War. We've been bombarded with propaganda claiming it was the end of history, that Western capitalist neoliberal democracy was the final stage of human development, and it was referred to as an era of peace and so-called Pax Americana, which is completely ridiculous. Pax Americana is, in Latin, American peace, the age of American peace. But what peace are they talking about? We're talking about millions of deaths just since 9/11 in 2001, not to mention the wars in the 1990s, like the first war on Iraq, the Gulf War, in which the U.S. destroyed Iraqi civilian infrastructure, bombing bridges and roads and hospitals. And then when Iraqi soldiers were fleeing, the U.S. Air Force massacred them on the so-called highway of death as they were literally fleeing and had their backs turned against them.
Civilians as
so
well.
Excluding that war, excluding the war, the NATO war that destroyed Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Yugoslavia no longer exists as a country. Not to mention the U.S. invasion of Panama in 1989 and 1990 that resulted in thousands of civilians dying, largely in poor barrios. I mean, where is the peace that they talk about when they talk about Pax Americana? It's completely fake. It's propaganda.
The whole thing about the Cold War. I mean, just the idea of the Cold War in general is kind of propaganda as well, because it wasn't cold for millions and millions of people. That's kind of what the takeaway is here, right? Yeah, it was cold for me and you, right? And it was cold in terms of the actual like superpowers that were going against each other there. It was extremely hot though for millions and millions of people. It was not a Cold War at all. In fact, you could argue that World War II just never even stopped. There's just been this, it just continued in sort of a different format since that time. Or World War III began with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it's just, we're still in it to this day. No, it's not cold in the Southern Hemisphere. That's what I mean. It's like those deaths don't count, right? Those deaths don't count. The Nazis won. I mean, I've been saying this. And people are not ready to hear it, unfortunately.
The reality is that the world has been devastated by non-stop wars and military interventions and coups and regime change operations and so-called color revolutions backed by the United States in the era of unipolar imperial hegemony after the overthrow of the Soviet Union in 1991. That's what real Pax Americana was. It was Imperio Norteamericano. It was the global U.S. empire, and it resulted in millions of deaths, literally tens of millions of deaths. Not to mention the sanctions that resulted in millions of deaths in Iraq, the sanctions that have resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths in Venezuela. The list is on. It has been absolutely devastating. In fact, I went through U.S. congressional data from the U.S. Congressional Research Service, and I went through every single U.S. foreign military intervention listed in the data, and I counted every one according to official U.S. government documents. And that means that since 1798, the U.S. has admitted to launching 469 foreign military interventions. And just since 1991, there have been more than half of those interventions.
That policy which pretends to aspire to peace but unerringly generates war. The policy of continual preparation for war. The policy of meddlesome interventionism. There was no corner of the known world where some interest was not alleged to be in danger or under actual attack.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
I'll continue reading, Dimitri, because this seems important. This seems very pertinent. That if the interests were not Roman, they were those of Rome's allies, and if Rome had no allies, then allies would be invented. When it was utterly impossible to contrive such an interest, why, then, it was the national honor that had been insulted. The fight was always invested with an aura of legality. Rome was always being attacked by evil-minded neighbors, always fighting for breathing space. The whole world was pervaded by a host of enemies, and it was manifestly Rome's duty to guard against their indubitably aggressive designs. Thank you, Dimitri. What happened to that old Roman Empire anyways? Can't quite recall how that all turned out. In my recollection, the empire just extended indefinitely into the future and just everything was great. I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
251 foreign U.S. military interventions since the end of the First Cold War. in the era of unipolar US imperial hegemony. That is what actual Pax Americana means. It means constant, non-stop US military interventions abroad. I mentioned earlier that this Brown University study is one part of a growing body of academic research looking at the devastating death toll of the post 9/11 wars waged by Washington. And there was a similar report published back in 2015 by the Nobel Prize winning organization, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. They estimated that 1.2 million people died in the US wars on Iraq and Afghanistan, and also the spillover into Pakistan as of 2015. And that doesn't include the subsequent 6 years of the war in Afghanistan. In this 2015 study, the group International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War wrote that they estimated more than 1 million people were killed in Iraq, 220,000 people in Afghanistan, and 80,000 people in Pakistan. And that doesn't include the death toll in the war in Yemen. And they emphasize, I'm reading from their report, quote, "This is only a conservative estimate. The total number of deaths in the three countries, that is Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan."
I think one thing, okay, so Matt's saying, I guess you could say a coalition of New Dealers and fascists won, but the fascists seized power over the 50s, early 60s. I mean, yeah, that's partly true. It seems like the New Dealers, the main New Dealers got pushed out of that, but you could argue that that tradition carried on through, LBJ and even Nixon. Like, you could argue Nixon was the last New Dealer president. But like the whole FDR direction, which maybe could have been a little bit different if there had been this kind of transition from the FDR years along those lines, and after his death, if there wasn't this kind of power struggle to ensure that they would go in a certain direction. I mean, that's kind of an interesting phenomenon as well. Yes, I have had Aaron Good on the show. Yeah, I have. The British Empire gave up hegemony because they had this retirement plan in place with their buddies, the U.S. China's been offering because it has a similar role, but we're too psychotic to understand. Yeah, we're like, no. Our empire is going to go on forever. The sun will never set.
You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Dimitri, for the gifted sub. Very much appreciated. And you'll have to go back and watch the conversation I had earlier, Dimitri, with fellow Greek person, Dimitri LASCARIS. It was a really good convo.
Could be in excess of 2 million deaths, whereas a figure below 1 million is extremely unlikely. That was as of 2015. So these are two different studies conducted by
Wasn't it? Because this is where I'm a little hazy on the transition, but wasn't there after FDR's death, was it FDR to Truman? Was he the next president? I'm a little hazy on the lineage there. But there was this process where they, wanted to transition into this more reactionary sort of direction, especially with foreign policy, right? I know I'm missing pieces of that puzzle. I know there was a fight at the convention, at the Democratic convention, where one popular VP candidate was undermined in a way to enhance these power players. Yeah, they pushed out Wallace in favor of Truman, and then FDR got it with the polio gun. Yeah. Yeah, and that was the beginning of the end, right? There was a possibility. There was a small possibility for after World War II, to not have that Cold War, and to have more collaboration with the US and the USSR, and to actually have kind of a lasting peace put in place. But that was all totally snuffed out. Whatever possibility there once was of that was snuffed out. Yeah, FDR was more willing to allegedly peacefully coexist with the USSR. Well, no, you get a sense from the the meetings that he had, like with Stalin and Churchill, that he got along pretty well with Stalin. It seemed like there was a lot more, there was a real possibility for that relationship even strengthening after the war, which it should have. I mean, that would have been, there's a timeline out there that's living in that timeline. And it's amazing to think about what our society could be like if we had focused instead on cooperation and mutual respect, and, security and, figuring out a new sort of energy future. I mean, all these, and not spending those trillions of dollars on wars and bombs, all the vast resources. I mean, there's a timeline out there where that's the direction things went after the war, and it's amazing to think about.
Established mainstream organizations. One of them is Brown University, an Ivy League school. It's constantly listed as one of the top most prestigious schools in the United States and the world. Their mainstream establishment scholars have acknowledged millions of people dying and suffering and starving because of these post 9/11 wars waged by the United States. Not to defend anything, not to defend human rights or democracy.
Totally, Johnny. It was at that time, be aggressive against the Soviets or not have a career in politics. And that's where we are right now. Like, we're right back there, even if we ever even left. Like, not only can you not be in politics if you're not totally aggressive with Russia, but also China as well. There's no one in Western politics that's being like, maybe we should cooperate more with China. Maybe we should cooperate more with Russia. There's literally no one saying that. Maybe some conservatives are trying to promote cooperation with Russia just because they think that they can recreate that Sino-Soviet split. But overall, you can't have a career in politics and advocate for, especially with China, more specifically, you cannot advocate for friendship or cooperation or diplomacy. It's just not really an option.
Fight so-called terrorism in imperial wars of conquest and domination to control the natural resources and the geostrategic locations of these countries. These were wars for empire, wars for capital, wars for corporate profit.
I definitely think Bernie would be better on foreign policy and pretty much any foreign policy issue, but he's not exactly been great on that when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. I don't know that he would have been, he might have had some better views, but I don't know if he would have done anything to meaningfully rein in the power of the intelligence agencies and the military, or if he would have really meaningfully pushed back against any of this stuff. I don't know. I don't really think so.
Not wars that actually helped anyone. They didn't help anyone. They destroyed millions of people's lives. And I'm really tired of people whitewashing how devastating the US empire was for the entire world. And as we see an increasingly multipolar world, there's constant propaganda and rosy retrospection saying, well, China is going to be so much worse than the US. Look how great the world was in the 1990s and 2000s under US unipolar imperial hegemonic domination. What are they talking about? This is the reality of what the US empire and Pax Americana looked like. Millions of people died. Tens of millions of people were turned into refugees and displaced. And countless people had their livelihoods destroyed. Also, a bunch of billionaire oligarchs could get richer, and the US economy and Western economies could become more and more unequal as their own people get poorer. Also, a small handful of rich capitalist oligarchs could get rich. They were the ones who benefited. With that said, I'm going to conclude here. I could keep ranting further, but I think this is a good time to end. I'm Ben Norton. I'm editor of Geopolitical Economy Report.
Thank you, Ben Norton. Please subscribe to the Geopolitical Economy Report. Ben's a friend of the show. Make sure you're supporting his content. He does a fantastic job breaking things down, which I appreciate a lot. We're the baddies, folks. This is the thing. This is it seems to be the fundamental thing that separates a lot of people on the West, this kind of analysis. Again, people get right up to it. Well, of course we're bad, but, Russia's worse. Of course we're bad, but Iran's worse. Of course we're bad, but China's worse. No one is worse. No one is worse. We're the bad guys. We're the evil empire. That's what people have to accept. People just have this inability to just accept this basic idea. And it seems to be what separates a lot of folks on the left, whether they can take this step to acknowledge this. And that there's no situation when you're living in America that it's appropriate or helpful to anybody to sit there and talk about America's official enemies and how terrible they are. This is an interesting point, Old Dutch, as well. If we're being honest too, it's also got to be extended past the handful of rich oligarchs to the effusive middle class. All of our easy comfort, convenience, and treats are built on the backs of the people they've rained terror on and exploited. I think that's ultimately the sick irony of these people as well. The level of greed that these elites have, which is they could all this kind of unrest that's happened and all the kind of social problems, they could just give up a little of their wealth and have a basic social safety net in the United States, or they could revamp Canada's social safety net. And a lot of people would be totally okay with that. And they would not fucking complain. And they could continue their reign of terror around the world and continue raking in billions of dollars. They just need to give back a little bit to have basic social services, to make it easy for people to get a home or to fucking have a decent living with dignity. That's what they did in this post-war period. It was the most economically successful moment in American history. And it built this middle class, and it was easy for people to get a home. It was easy for people to have support a family of 2 or 3 in a home with a single income family. This was possible. And they could have that again, and a lot of people would be totally okay with that, and they would not complain, and they would not ask any questions about what the empire's up to. But they can't do it. In fact, there was this whole multi-generational process. Sorry about the beeping. I don't know what that is. There was this whole multi-generational process to claw back all those New Deal benefits that were given to people that built that economically successful time. These New Deal benefits, which also wouldn't have existed without the Soviet Union and without Russia and the threat of revolution. They would just have to, there was this whole process because as much as the New Deal did lead to that successful moment in American history, that it built that middle class, for the elites that had to wanted more and more and more, that was not acceptable for them, and they engaged in this multi-generational project to claw that back until they got to the Reagan era, when they finally finished filling in the dirt on the grave of the New Deal or whatever possibility of a social safety net might exist in America. Because that's it. Their greed is their own undoing. They could get away with so much if they just allowed this basic social safety net to exist in our society, but they can't do it. Just like they couldn't stop, even when they won in the Cold War and they got Russia they abolished this, they got rid of the Soviet Union, and they got all these places to give up on socialism, and all they had to do is just accept them into their little club, as we've talked about a number of times, and they just couldn't do it. They had to keep pushing and pushing. They had won. There was the Sino-Soviet split. All their enemies were divided and conquered, and they just couldn't leave well enough alone. They had to keep poking and prodding and pushing and pushing and pushing until, through their own belligerence and their own greed, they pushed all these people right back together, right back into an alliance together. And we see internationally that greed is going to be their undoing, and we're going to see it domestically as well. But it would be, you know what I mean, though? It's true. It's totally true. If people just took this immense wealth that's generated from this exploitation and violence that we've perpetuated, and just give people a basic opportunity in the imperial core to live with basic dignity, to be able to get a home, an education, to have a social safety net, but they can't do it. They just can't do it. Because they're sick. Their sickness. They have a sickness. The people that have these elites, the capitalists, the people that control our society, they're sick. That's why we'd be doing them a favor. We'd be helping them to not only take away their wealth, to take away control of the state, but to re-educate them as well, to allow them to like contribute meaningfully to society. You know, we would be helping them. It would be a benefit to them to cure them of this sickness they have. Anyway, I'm going to go, folks. A great episode of TRRS today. I've got another couple minutes. I've got another 5 to 10 minutes before we raid here. If anyone else wants to subscribe and support the show, would be much appreciated. As I've said, it's been kind of rough this week. I'm really happy that I was able to get to the sub goal today, but of course it was still quite a rough week in terms of the streaming and all the issues that I ran into. So still running at a little bit of a deficit here. So if anyone wants to support the community and support the work that I do here on Twitch, and you know, if you want to continue this kind of content, make sure it stays on the air. Please, if you can, subscribe to the show. It really helps out. I appreciate it a lot. And I love you. That's all. What was the mix up with Dimitri? He just he thought Thursday. We said Wednesday. He put Thursday in his calendar, and he was very nice about it. And I was happy that he was able to come back.
And then you have the power of an emerging India, an emerging Brazil.
We got David.
It's all right. I'm not actually mad.
I just sent the lads around to set him straight. That's exactly what I did. It's absolutely right.
No, I just get a little. There are a few more peeps in here, and Pipper's like always in here, so like if I need some freaking yeah, there you
go. Okay.
Need a quick comment deleted or oh yeah, good boy gangsterin. Come on.
The no takers on that final sub, huh? Do you have an idea of where you can find the vid on you and Aaron? Yeah, of course, it's on my YouTube page actually. From last year. It was a great conversation, but should probably have him back at some point. I'll go ahead and post it in the chat right now. And please, if you can, subscribe to my YouTube page as well.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to
upload enough stuff to it. I should do it way more. I just don't really have the time or energy to do it because I have a lot of great conversations on the show that I can and should turn into YouTube content, and I just don't do it.
This is a powerhouse combination.
Thank you, Fart Party 69. Thank you for the gifted sub. I really appreciate that.
As did all the empires in the Middle Ages.
From valued community member, Fart Party 69.
Half-life speedrun that averages like wow, this song is pretty freaking important over here. Also, you wanna get. Actually, I'll just copy paste it. Oh, good boy, gang.
Maintain the status quo.
So many in chat who are just, little angels. Look at all these little angels in chat.
Thanks again, folks. This was a great show.
Eventually, they were swept into the fucking sickos on your sock account.
Really good stuff. Oh, I forgot David was on in the other window there. Okay. Did I spell that right? Oh, I did. Nice. Okay, so Avatar 2 is tomorrow night in the Discord. We were watching Avatar Way of Water in the Discord. When is that? Because we might have to do it in 2 sessions. Like if people are down to do the whole thing in one, that's fine with me, obviously. $9.15. Okay. It is over 3 hours long. It is over 3 hours long. But Avatar Way of Water in the Discord server tomorrow, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is 10:15 a.m. Pyongyang time, I believe. Come see my favorite film of the year. Just watch it at 1.5 speed, no problem. Give my regards to our friend David. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in this week. I hope you enjoyed the show today. It was fantastic. I'll see you movie night and on Monday.